and welcome to the Incomplete Guide to Film podcast, where we're learning filmmaking together. I'm your host, Alex Pinnell, and today we're going to be doing a very different kind of episode. So the way that I learn from filmmaking and other filmmakers is to look at their example, and the good things, I try to figure out how I can emulate that, how I can do that in my filmmaking. And the bad things, I try to figure out how I can prevent those things from happening in my films. So today we're going to do an analysis episode. This is where I take either a filmmaker's filmography or a specific thing in film news over the last week or so, and we examine it and figure out why things happen the way they did and how either we can prevent them or we can take those elements and bring them into our own skill set. So today we're going to be doing an analysis on Zack Snyder. Yes, I do keep going back to Batman v Superman, but I think it's a very interesting subject because, back in 2008, we were talking about the whole financial crisis, and there was this term that I saw over and over and over, is that the banks were too big to fail. And this movie was literally too big to fail. It was, it was panned by critics. And not just professional ones, people who love comic book movies, people who were, gunning for this movie to be awesome. They wanted it to be great, and they went and they were disappointed. Not only did they disappoint the critics, but they also disappointed their audience that they made the movie for, as they say. So, is it Zack Snyder's problem? Why did it happen? That's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So let's start with Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder really came onto the scene in 2004 with his remake of Dawn of the Dead, the classic Romero zombie movie set in a shopping mall. He remade it and gave it a really nice polish. It looks really great. And that's the thing about Zack Snyder movies. They always look amazing. They always have a very clear visual direction, and the visuals are always superb. So, after the success of Dawn of the Dead, he went on to do movies like 300 and Sucker Punch and Watchmen and Man of Steel, then recently Batman v Superman. And he has become the Joss Whedon for the DC cinematic universe. He is the one kind of situating everything and getting everything together so that's one cohesive picture. The same job that Joss Whedon had for at least the first two phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He was involved, well, really phase 2, because he was involved from Avengers on. And he'd kind of been in the talks and everything during the first one, but he wasn't really really involved until after his film. So that's who Zack Snyder is. If you look on IMDb, he's a producer for every announced DC film that's coming out. He's the one that they've chosen to hitch their wagon to. He's the one who's going to be directing the future of WB's attempts to bring the DC universe to the cinematic experience. So, why did Batman v Superman fail critically while it was financially successful? It did see a huge drop. Even the opening weekend, it saw a huge drop in ticket sales between Friday and Sunday, which over a 3-day period to see a large drop is rather disconcerting. Hence the viral marketing campaign that they've been trying to do to cover their butt about this movie. You know, we didn't make it for the critics, we made it for the audience. Well, yeah, but the audience didn't like it. So, I mean, is it really Zack Snyder's problem? And will this ruin the future of these classic characters that are coming to the big screen? Well, let's look at Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder is famous for his visuals. You know, if you look at his filmography, he has done almost exclusively comic book movies. There was Dawn of the Dead before, and there were a couple of video things that, you know, aren't really anything that anyone would recognize. I don't recognize them even. And after that, it's all comic book movies. It's all DC movies. It's all, you know, it's Watchmen and Sucker Punch and, you know, all the comic style movies. So what I'm gathering from this, and I don't know a lot about Zack Snyder personally, you know, I have seen some interviews and all that, you know, especially when movies were coming out, and he seems to me to be a comic book nerd. You know, he likes the visual style and the aesthetic of comic books and graphic novels, so he puts that into his filmmaking. You can even see it in Dawn of the Dead in some respects. You know, he's a very visual director. He knows how to set things up so it looks awesome. And since he's doing action movies, since he's doing superhero movies, looking awesome is important. You know, if he were doing, you know, indie dramas, it would be a little different. You know, all the stylizing that he does would kind of be out of place, I think. You know, I think that one thing that he does like to do is he likes to rip images right from the source material. You know, he has several scenes in 300 that look like the comic book panels. There's a part in Batman v Superman that they showed in the trailer where they parody the cover of the comic book that it's based on. It goes on and on and on, and the visual aesthetic looks great. You know, I've seen most of his films. Actually, I've seen Man of Steel and Watchmen, and, you know, all those. I even saw the Dawn of the Dead remake into the, you know, not when it came out, but later. And he has a very, you know, he knows what he wants from a cinematographer. He gets a certain look and feel for his films. You know, even his one animated film, which was the Guardians Owls of Ga'Hoole one, the one, you know, it's kids' books about owls, and, you know, it was interesting, and it had a lot of those, you know, visual things that he does. There was a lot of slow motion and all that, because, you know, it does look cool. A little overused perhaps, but it does, you know, look interesting. So the point is, he's, you know, a very visual director. And I think that they picked him, you know, WB did, because he is, you know, he's made some of their films before that were very popular. Watchmen and 300 both were rather popular. You know, 300 probably more, but, you know, they were both very popular, and I think they were actually very, very well received by comic book fans, even though I didn't really like Watchmen very much. But I didn't have any frame of reference before I saw the movie, so, you know, I don't really know much about it. I just didn't really like the story. But that could be the story from the source material. And if you do the source material, you know, that should be above, you know, making a Hollywood ending or whatever. It should, if you're adapting something, it should be the source material. And that's kind of where he kind of falls short. Not necessarily not sticking to the source material, because I think he sticks to the source material rather well. Though they changed a lot of stuff in Batman v Superman. They put the death of Superman in there as well, with the whole Doomsday thing. And they didn't have Green Arrow like they're supposed to, and all these different things. It's not the same, but I think it shares kind of the tone, the spirit of it. But I think his issue is he doesn't concern himself as much with story. Even though you write a script, even though you have a script writer write a script, that doesn't necessarily mean that the director is going to shoot it the way the script is intended to be shot. The director is still in the chair. He's the one in charge. The producers do tell him what to do, but I think that for the most part, directors are not solely responsible, but the first person that people look to, at least when a movie's great or a movie's terrible. They go, Christopher Nolan was a great director. Look at that movie. It was awesome. And then they look at someone like Michael Bay, and Transformers was horrible. Michael Bay's a horrible director. He's not a horrible director. It's just they didn't care much about story. And I think that's the same thing that these are suffering from. It made a ton of money in the box office. Zootopia came out, kind of the same time, and it was great. And, in its third weekend, it was just hitting $800 million, where Batman v Superman made, I think it was like $900 million in its first weekend, even with that huge drop. I might be off on those numbers, but I do know that it was more. And that makes sense because it's a blockbuster movie, where Zootopia really isn't. It's a family movie, and it's a cool, cute little animated comedy. But that's more of a normal movie versus this blockbuster. Compare and contrast. So, really, why did this fail? Is it Zack Snyder's problem? No, I don't think it's Zack Snyder's problem that it failed. I don't think it's Zack Snyder's fault. Would someone else have done it better if they were in the director's chair? I believe so, actually. Honestly, I don't really know who I would put in that director's chair. Because one, they have a lot to live up to, because Marvel is beating them. They have 12 hits already on their cinematic universe thing. You have a lot to catch up on, and that's why they did Batman v Superman basically first, because Man of Steel, we weren't certain that it was a cinematic universe thing, though it's technically the first film. It's like Iron Man, where I didn't know that it was a cinematic universe film before they really did the Avengers. I was like, oh yeah, they're doing all these things, but until the Avengers came out, I wasn't certain that they were ever going to actually get there. But, if I was going to put anybody in the director's chair, I would say that it would probably be Matthew Vaughn. Matthew Vaughn has done some really great comic book adaptations, and he has changed some things. Kick-Ass, for example. He changed a few things where he got the girl in the first movie, and he didn't get the girl before because she was too pissed at him, and that he lied to her. And Kingsman, which came out last year, did incredibly well. It's getting a sequel. It's doing very well. Everybody loved Kingsman, so I think that he could have done a great comic book adaptation while keeping it PG-13, hopefully. But for me, I'm not really sure who I put in the director's chair, but, I'm not really the person to ask because I don't really care. My friend David would probably be the person to ask because he is a Batman fanatic. The dude loves Batman. Batman's great, in my opinion, but this guy takes DC fandom to a whole nother level. He's been to Comic-Con and all that stuff, where I haven't really, I'm a nerd, but I haven't done all the nerdy stuff. I haven't gone to Comic-Con or any of that stuff, so I don't know. Maybe I'm a pseudo nerd, who knows? But really, I don't think it's Zack Snyder's problem. I think that the problem with this rests actually with the studio, because the studio chose to hire Zack Snyder because they were looking for that kind of film. They were looking for a visual style and a darker tone that they thought would make their films the more adult, mature version, while Marvel's just playing around and having fun. They're the little kids movies, the ones that you send, the ones that you take your kids to. Well, these are mature adult stories. Well, it didn't really end up that way because you have a whole bunch of plot holes, and it just, acting performances weren't great, and it's a mess, unfortunately. But in their defense, there's a lot that they tried to put into this. If they would have scaled it down a little, I think that it would have been better. A good example of this is Deadpool. Deadpool came out earlier this year to rave reviews, and everyone loved it. And why did everyone love it? Because it was true to the source material. But if you actually watch it, it's a very actually short film, and it's a very small film. Not much actually happens in it. If you take the story points and you write them out on paper, it's not a lot. And you write out a lot of other superhero movies like Iron Man or Winter Soldier are good examples, and a lot's happening. A lot's happening in an hour and a half, 2 hours, where I think Deadpool was right at 90 minutes, and it's literally one little altercation. They go back and tell the backstory and all that, and then they start at the opening scene, and they move on from there. But it's very short. It's a very short span between the actual beginning of the film, which is right around the middle, actually. But that's kind of how the flashback sort of works, and the end of the film. There isn't a huge long sequence of events. And I think that worked in its favor, because we're used to these big, long, drawn-out superhero movies like Age of Ultron. Age of Ultron, I didn't like it my first viewing, but it did seem very long. It felt like, we were going all these different places, and it felt like a very international movie, where Deadpool was much smaller. So, Zack Snyder isn't a bad director. He is just a different kind of director. He's a very visual director. And honestly, I think that if he were to do more projects where the story didn't matter as much, and it was really just a very visual story, I think that he would do a lot better. 300, there wasn't a whole lot of story to it. It was, these guys are stopping the Persians from coming and taking their land. And that was it. And there was a huge fight, and the fight took, an hour and a half. It was a long fight. And I think that worked very well for it. The lack of story actually worked in that film's favor, because you had more time to play with the visuals, and you didn't have to worry about telling this whole big story. So, that's my piece on Zack Snyder. He's not a bad director. They just put him in a director role for a film that his filmmaking style, his directing style, his voice isn't really well suited for. We have to, if we're, putting another director on it possibly, what if we're screenwriters or something, we have to put a director in that's voice works with what the end product is going to be. You can't have a deep story with someone who's a very visual director, using this example. And you can't have someone who is very story oriented. I would say the Russo brothers is a good example, or John Lasseter. They're very story oriented. Putting them in a more visual film might break it. We've got to play to our strengths. Good day and good filmmaking.